You want to cut down on corruption? It's good for people to be independently wealthy before they are in office. It's not a bad thing.
There you have Ben Shapiro, one of the few individuals really who is willing to defend Dr. Oz, even as he puts out some pretty cringe-worthy campaign ads and campaign videos. Crudité was one of the more notorious ones in recent days. And it's interesting, the argument that he's making, especially at a time when populism seems to be rising in both parties, to be sure. With that said, though, let's take a quick look at what else Shapiro had to say.
But the real campaign issue in Pennsylvania, according to everybody, is Dr. Mehmet Oz is an elitist. He's an elitist. And we know that if you earn money in the United States, this makes you unqualified for office. So sure, the original founders of the country tended to be overwhelmingly wealthy men because, again, the idea here is that if you don't want people in politics who are demagogues, then it's good for them to have an outside source of income. You want to cut down on corruption? It's good for people to be independently wealthy before they are in office. It's not a bad thing. It gives you the ability to say things that are actually on your mind because you have less to lose. This is why, biblically speaking, most of the prophets were actually kind of wealthy. Because if you're wealthy, you don't have much to lose. In any case, Dr. Oz has now come under severe fire. Not a biblical prophet, but a candidate for Pennsylvania. Why? Well, because he was asked about the number of houses that he owns, and he was off.
He was off by only about 8 houses. And that is where the issue lies. The fact that he is attempting this Mitt Romney strategy, which by the way also failed with Mitt Romney, of really connecting with ordinary voters, even though he's a man who is worth over $100 million. He keeps trying to pretend like he understands their economic pain by going to a grocery store, accidentally calling it a name that doesn't even exist because he doesn't actually live in Pennsylvania or ever shop at a grocery store or shop for groceries himself. Then he proceeds to talk about inflation while referring to a vegetable plate as a crudité, which ordinary people who you're trying to connect with don't really relate to. So that's why it's a problem, right? So at a time when economic anxiety among Americans on both sides of the aisle are at an all-time high, it's understandable when people get turned off by a politician who just feels super disconnected from them and what they're experiencing. That's the issue.
So, as always, they do a caricature of what the left says. That's what his starting point. He says, anyone who's independently wealthy, they say is disqualified from office. Really, who said that? FDR was independently wealthy and he was a terrific president. Nobody said that. What we're talking about is when people use their wealth to then pay off politicians or become politicians themselves and then fix the rules to their own benefit. So there isn't a problem with being rich. There's a problem with being rich and then rigging the system for lower tax cuts for the rich, deregulation of their companies, and on and on and on. Of course, he always ignores that. Go ahead, Anna.
I disagree with you. I do think there's a sizable portion of the left that openly and very candidly shares their disdain for wealthy people, regardless of who they are, what they do, and what they advocate for. Doesn't matter. I mean, prime example is the reaction to your nephew Hassan buying a house. I mean, the freak out over that was insane. So yeah, that does exist. I would say it's wrong to characterize everyone on the left as being a believer in just hating someone automatically if they're wealthy, but it is a sizable portion of the left as far as I've seen.
Yeah, so no, that's a fair point. There are some folks in the left who feel that way, but obviously they're irrational. And by the way, think about how silly their point of view is. Hey, if there's ever anyone on the left with a lot of power, make sure you give it away so you have no power left. With today, David Sorota's Lever broke a story that a Republican gave $1.6 billion. A Republican donor gave that to the right wing. Well, what do you want us to do? You want to take every person that has even a dollar on the left and bankrupt them so they can't fight back? So I'm not interested in a splinter group on the left who decide to be purposely unintelligent, not remotely interested, okay? So now go to Shapiro's main argument, he says, well, if you're wealthy, that's better because you don't have much to lose. Does the right wing even listen to the words that come out of his mouth? No, if you're wealthy, you have more to lose. That's why they're always unfortunately, way too often, they're advocating for themselves because they have a lot to lose. What kind of rationale is that? He's not even trying to make sense. And then he says, oh, well, the prophets were all rich. Were they? Were they? Because that's not how I remember it. I'm pretty sure that we were taught that Jesus was incredibly poor, was a carpenter, and gave away all of his worldly goods and encouraged everyone else to give away their worldly goods. It's incredible the ease with which right-wing hosts lie on not just a regular basis, on almost every sentence.
Now, I do want to just kind of go back to discussing who Dr. Oz is and why he turns off voters. By the way, not just on the left, obviously he's going to turn off voters on the left, but voters on the right. Remember the reaction that Republicans had both in the right-wing press and also among right-wing voters when Donald Trump decided to endorse Dr. Oz. They thought it was a terrible move. They begged him not to do it. He did it anyway. And it was just clear that Republican voters weren't really supportive of him from the jump. Now, I want to get into his wealth a little bit because fact of the matter is the other issue here is the fact that even Republican voters understand that we're living under corporate rule, where you have corporate donors who essentially get to decide what policies get passed in this country. And so Mehmet Oz, a celebrity physician turned politician, reported raising almost $5.9 million in his first month in the Republican race for the US Senate in Pennsylvania. But most of it came from money he loaned to his campaign. His initial campaign finance report filed with the FEC of activity through December 31st showed 5.2 million in loans to the campaign and almost $670,000 in contributions. That is pretty amazing. So most of his money did come from his own wealth, most of his campaign funding. Oz valued his assets at between 104 million and $422 million, according to a tally by the Philadelphia Inquirer, a wide range that is the result of the Senate's request that each asset be valued within a certain dollar bracket. Thus, shielding them from really having to disclose how much money they really have, how much wealth they really have. And here's another example of a rich guy trying to buy an election. This is from the 2020 presidential race. Michael Bloomberg put more than $200 million of his personal fortune into his presidential campaign by the end of December of 2019, with the overwhelming bulk of that sum going to a mammoth advertising campaign on television and online. And he does have an estimated worth or wealth of $50 billion. And it looked like he did have a couple $100 million to lose. He did lose it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so this is the politicians that we're used to. Yes, in the old days, before the corruption became infinite and entrenched, you had people like FDR and JFK who were very wealthy but did the right thing and looked out for those who had less. But now we don't have that anymore. Whether it's a corporate Democrat like Michael Bloomberg or a corporate Republican like Dr. Oz, all they care about is they spend money to make more money. If Michael Bloomberg won, he could have given himself a tax cut that'd make that $200 million look like a joke. He could save about 100 times that amount with a tax cut he'd give himself. And he certainly would, because Bloomberg is just as corrupt on economic issues as Dr. Oz is. And we've been playing this game a long time. But look, I know the Republicans know nothing, including they probably don't know a single line from the Bible. So I'm gonna read you one last one in case you believe that Ben Shapiro is right, that all the prophets were rich and wanted you to be rich. Matthew 19:24, this is Jesus. Quote, again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. So Jesus was way tougher, 100 times tougher than we are on the rich. He didn't care if you were FDR or Bloomberg or anything. He said, you're not getting into heaven. Only the poor and the non-rich are getting into heaven. So did you ever hear that on Ben Shapiro's show? Did you ever hear that on a single right-wing show? No, because they love to lie about the Bible endlessly.
It's funny because that reminds me, over the weekend, I took my niece to the Santa Monica Pier. She had never been. And there was a group of fundamentalists screaming in a bullhorn about you're a bad person for being here and having a good time with your family. God will punish you and you will die, like that kind of stuff. And as I was passing by them, I just, shouted calmly, Jesus was a socialist, and they lost it. It was hilarious. It was one of the funniest things I've experienced in a long time. They didn't like that.
Yeah, Anna, to be fair, you were not entirely accurate. Read the Bible. He is as hardcore a communist as you will ever find in any book, anywhere. He'd make Karl Marx blush. He said, give away all of your worldly possessions. Don't have any.
Inconvenient truths. That's what we have here at TYT. Inconvenient for the right wing, of course.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.